I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Bob Martin. Bob Martin is the director of the Food System Policy Program at Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future and is a guest lecturer at the school. Formerly, Mr. Martin was a senior officer at the Pew Environment Group and was the executive director of the Pew Commission on Industrial Farm Animal Production, a 2-year study funded by the Pew Charitable Trusts by a grant to Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. The charge to the commission was to recommend solutions to the problems caused by concentrated animal feeding operations in the areas of public health, the environment, rural communities, and animal welfare. The commission's final report, Putting Meat on the Table, Industrial Farm Animal Production in America, was released on April 28, 2008. Bob?
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate being here. I appreciated Aaron's flexibility in making it possible for me to come and address this group, and it's such an impressive number of people that have showed up to hear about these really serious animal welfare issues that really lead to very serious public health and environmental issues, and I believe are a driver behind killing rural communities across the United States. Just a little bit first about the Center for Livable Future. We were established 18 years ago by a man named Dr. Robert S. Lawrence. And he was the associate dean of the Bloomberg School at the time. And he's a Harvard College graduate, went to Harvard Medical School. And he wanted to establish a center and a school of public health that looked at the intersection of agricultural production, public health outcomes, and environmental damage. So one kind of overarching thing that we say at the center is we believe what Sir Albert Howard said. And I don't know, does anybody here know who Albert Howard was? He's kind of the founder or the dean of organic food production, and he worked primarily in India in the 1930s. And he said that the problems of soil, plant, animal, and human health is all one topic. And we believe that as well. And another person we like to quote that kind of frames the way we work is Wendell Berry, and he has said that how we eat determines in large part how we use the planet. And so we try to look at a more sustainable food production system. We're primarily focused on addressing the problems of industrial farm animal production. You may have seen some of our scientists' work, although not knowing they were our scientists. Dr. Keeve Nachman, who heads the Food Production and Public Health Program at the center, does a lot of the risk assessment for Consumers Union. So when you hear that there's an arsenic problem with apple juice, arsenic problems in brown rice and white rice, or there's a cancer-causing risk in caramel coloring, which is very prevalent in the food system, the Center for a Livable Future has done the risk assessment for Consumers Union. We have 3 other programs, one that I lead that's fairly new. I'm the only person in it. So that's how new it is. And that's the Food System Policy Program. And we will eventually be working at the federal and state levels to support more sustainable ag production policy. We have another program called Food, Communities, and Public Health that is really focused on building community support for more sustainable agriculture. A couple of our main programs there are food policy networks that seek to help existing food policy councils improve their interaction on policy work at all levels, and the Maryland Mapping Project. We have mapped food production, consumption, distribution, and availability for the entire state of Maryland. So as we seek to change the system in Maryland, we'll know what kind of crops are displaced. And then we have food system sustainability, which really is focused more on climate issues. As was said in the introduction, the Pew Commission was really the brainchild of a man at the Pew Charitable Trust named Dr. Josh Reichert. And for about 8 years, he tried to develop kind of an overview of a program that could attack all the problems or develop recommendations to solve all the major problems involved in food animal production. His primary concern, however, was animal welfare. And after developing a public health environment, rural communities, and animal welfare project, the Pew board granted about $3.4 million to Johns Hopkins, specifically the Center for a Livable Future, where I've returned, to study these problems. We had 16 commissioners from all walks of life. We had production agriculture, government officials, ethicists, public health officials, medical experts, veterinary medical experts. We were charged, as was said in the introduction also, with developing consensus recommendations in the areas of public health, the environment, animal welfare, and rural communities. I had spent kind of a checkered career on Capitol Hill working on the dark side, and left the state Senate, or the U.S. Senate, excuse me, in 2005 to run the Pew Commission. I'd worked for the last 4 Democratic senators from South Dakota. I'm going to try to reduce expectations even beyond what Erica did. I actually dropped out of law school, actually fairly early, from what we called the Harvard Law School of the North, or the University of South Dakota. And much to my father's dismay, but I was attracted to politics. And so I worked off and on at the federal and state levels. Like I said, the last 4 Democratic senators from South Dakota, and Dan Glickman, when he was a member of Congress, I worked in his office as well. So we were charged with developing recommendations. We found broadly that the current system used to produce, as Paul said, about 99.9% of the animals in the country represented an unacceptable level of threat to public health, an unacceptable level of damage to the environment, were actually harmful to the animals housed in these systems, and were detrimental to the long-term economic development of rural communities. You can see here who some of the members were. Some of the people who may stand out. One person got dropped out somehow in transferring the file, but he won't mind. The chair is in the upper left on the first row, former Kansas Governor John Carlin. Michael Blackwell was the vice chair. He's the man just to the right. He was, at the time, the dean of the School of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He'd also been at the FDA for a number of years, and he had been an assistant surgeon general when David Satcher was the surgeon general. Other people you may have heard of, Fred Kirshenman. He's at the far right of the top row. He was then the director of the Leopold Center at Iowa State, and he's now the president of Stone Barns in New York, both groups working on sustainable food production issues. Dan Glickman is on the far left on the second row, former Secretary of Ag. Marion Nessel is in the middle and the next to the bottom row. She's a nutritionist, well known in writing about food politics from NYU. Mary Wilson is just to the left of that. She is actually on faculty here at the Harvard School of Public Health and does some instruction too at the Harvard Medical School. Her husband has just stepped down as the head of the Institute of Medicine. His name's Dr. Harvey Feinberg. And a couple of people on the bottom row who you may know. The guy on the far left is Fidel Bascio, the chairman and president of Bon Appetit Management Company, which is an institutional food service. If the law school has a food service and they don't have him, you ought to get him, because he sustainably sources his produce. He has a 30-mile radius rule, humanely raised eggs, both eggs and breakers, which are used in baking, and antibiotic-free meat. The other guy is Bill Nyman on the far right of Nyman Ranches. So we looked at defining a concentrated animal feeding operation the way the EPA does. The EPA, the regulation of CAFOs is done through the Clean Water Act, permitting done through the Clean Water Act and EPA primarily, although some state-level environmental agencies and state-level ag departments regulate some CAFOs and do some permitting. They differ in size and obviously by species, but some of the common factors are large numbers of the same species, confined in a relatively small space, lack of natural movement, lack of natural expression, solid waste management for egg producers and broilers, and liquid waste management for dairy and swine. These are actual pictures that I took to the dismay of the industrial people who were cooperating with us at the time. The top one is a pen system that is not as inhumane as gestation crates, but it was an industrial farm in North Carolina. The second is a fairly standard picture of battery cages, and Paul had some very good pictures of those. That's from an eastern Colorado facility that has both cage layers and cage-free operations. That's a typical broiler operation like the one we saw in Arkansas. And when I went in one of the barns with a couple of the commissioners, they were almost overcome by the ammonia and dust in the barn. There was like this haze in the air. All the people working in them had respirators on. And the birds were kind of laying on the ground, did not have very many feathers, and were kind of lethargic and flopping around. And I said to one of the workers, I said, "Is this the sick barn? Have you segregated the sick animals?" He goes, "Oh, these are actually the healthy ones." And so the production system really is a threat to the animal's health. The bottom picture is the largest feed lot in the United States. It's in eastern Colorado as well. 110,000 beef cattle were there the day we were there. There are no trees. When we asked the cowboys running the place, well, it's, the cattle on the range, when it's really hot, they'll stand in water or they'll go congregate around trees. What do these guys do? Well, they stand in the sun and we spray them with lawn sprinklers. This is Dr. Ellen Silberg's quote about what a typical CAFO is like. She was involved with the commission and helped co-write one of our technical reports. CAFOs are comparable to poorly run hospitals where everyone gets antibiotics, patients lie in unchanged beds, hygiene is non-existent, infections and reinfections are rife, waste is thrown out the window, and visitors enter and leave at will. So this is how not to get too bogged down in process, but I always want to go through this to show that we did really a serious inquiry, a thorough inquiry, because we wanted to have that basis for the report, because we thought the recommendations would upset the industry quite a bit, and they did. So you can see our due diligence. The 8 technical reports covered areas of antibiotic use, animal welfare, rural community impact, the economics of swine production, the impact on animal health, and the impact on human health of these systems. So we did, a lot of reviewing of existing science, and I think one of the ongoing benefits of the Pew Commission report is it's a good glossary of the science available at the time. We adopted our recommendations by consensus, which was a really difficult process because initially we had a very Republican state senator from a Midwestern state on the commission, and we had a representative of Cargill. At the end, there was an effort to subvert the commission being able to complete its work and issue a report, and so they were resigned from the commission. The guy from Cargill, I think, was happy because the meat industry is it's like the meat mafia. They don't take well to people that tell family secrets across the family. We had 24 primary recommendations. 12 of them concerned public health, and 5 of those 12 concerned antibiotic use, because we found that while animal welfare concerns were at the core of these systems, a couple things allowed that to happen, and one of them is the subtherapeutic use of antibiotics. Just quickly to talk about our top recommendations in our 4 areas. In the environment, we thought that more operations should be permitted. We urged the EPA to do an inventory of these operations. The locations of all of them are not even known. About 36% of them are permitted as of 2009. So, 64% of the operations, and therefore a larger percentage of the waste is not regulated. The biggest impact on rural communities is the vertical integration of the meat industry. It forces independent players out of production and switches to a contract production system. So we urged, there are enough antitrust laws on the books that this could be remedied by aggressive enforcement of those laws. We supported banning gestation crates, battery cages, and restricted veal crates. We had a lot of other animal welfare recommendations as well. We opposed tail docking. We opposed of dairy cattle. We opposed removal of teeth in pigs without anesthetic. And there's a process in cattle production called tolling. I don't know if you know what that is, but they cut the horns off of the animals without anesthetic, and it's a very painful process. One thing we couldn't come to agreement on was the issue of castration. So Paul is right. There's this kind of bizarre cultural thing about castration that split the commission, but true to our charter of not doing anything that wasn't consensus, we didn't do anything on castration. Our number one concern in the public health area is the routine daily use of antibiotics in food animal production. And it's necessary because the animals are overcrowded. They're not allowed to interact with their environment in a way that they can retain their health without the use of antibiotics. And it's a very serious driver of antibiotic resistance. So our number one public health recommendation was to ban the non-therapeutic use, and then we decided we better define it. So our 1.1 recommendation in public health was to define therapeutic use. And you obviously have to treat sick animals, right? So that's called therapeutic use. When there's a diagnosed microbial disease, you treat them at therapeutic levels for a short period of time to get them over the disease. But the non-therapeutic use is where the damage lies. And we define non-therapeutic use as basically all other uses. So if it's for growth promotion, for compensating for overcrowding and poor waste management, feed efficiency, weight gain, any of those things is considered non-therapeutic and should be banned. But we did have a prevention, realizing that if a handful of birds and a flock of chickens get sick, you need to prevent the spread of the disease by treating the whole flock. If a couple of pigs come down with pneumonia, to keep the spread, to keep the pneumonia from spreading, you need to treat the whole herd, but you need to do it at therapeutic levels for a short period of time. And the reason why this is a problem is this chart right here. The FDA has said that, based on data from the industry, that 80% of the antibiotics used in the country are used in food animal production. There's 7 or 8 of them that are identical to the antibiotics that are given to people. The Pew Health Group had determined, I think it's 74% of the antibiotics used in food animal production are also used in human medicine. So it's a very serious problem. And under a lot of pressure, the former deputy administrator of FDA, Josh Sharfstein, said that the overall weight of evidence shows that this is a problem. He got into a lot of hot water from USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack for expressing that fairly common sense position. And so antimicrobial misuse is represented with these main criteria. It's a lower dose, it's for a long duration, usually the entire time the animals are held in confinement. There's a withdrawal period, so before they go to slaughter, for about a week before they go to slaughter, they can't have antibiotics. It's delivered in the feed and water, and there's almost no veterinarian oversight in that example. And so this rather stern-looking Scottish gentleman, people say, oh, well, this is not proven. Their antibiotic use is okay in food animals. This is the guy that synthesized penicillin. His name is Sir Alexander Fleming, and in his acceptance speech for getting the Nobel Prize in 1945 for synthesizing antibiotics, this is what he said, or synthesizing penicillin, this is what he said: "The time may come when penicillin can be bought by anyone in the shops. Then there's the danger that the ignorant man may easily underdose himself, and by exposing his microbes to non-lethal quantities of the drug, make them resistant. If you use penicillin, use enough. He had found he first synthesized penicillin from natural sources in the mid-30s. He found almost immediately that there was an issue with antibiotic resistance in the lab. FDA regulates the use of antibiotics in food animals because it's a weird split in the government because they regulate what feed content is for food animals. But USDA has a major influence on how they're used and regulated. And I just always use this to highlight how schizophrenic USDA is on this issue. The top quote is from the Economic Research Service at USDA, which is probably the least politically tainted or least politically impacted part of USDA. They said, what we're doing with antibiotics is not right. The bigger operations tend to be the biggest abusers, and so we need to stop that. The middle guy is a veterinarian at USDA, and he grudgingly said, yeah, there's kind of a problem and we're watching it, but we don't think we should be concerned about it. Tom Vilsack said, no problem, we're using them properly, don't worry about it. This is why, this is not a very sophisticated diagram, but it shows, I think, why the misuse of antibiotics in food animal production is important. At the top is the pig house, the confinement building. You see the worker coming out, the X's indicate antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They transport it into the processing plant. Through their families, they transport it into the community and then into the hospitals. The really dangerous part are the X's up in the pond and the X's in the truck spreading the pig manure. Because CLF has participated in research that shows flies up to 5 miles away from these operations have antibiotic-resistant bacteria on them. We've had cars follow poultry trucks on the eastern shore of Maryland, and we test the inside of the car, and it's coated with antibiotic-resistant bacteria, even when the windows are up and the air conditioner's running. We've also shown that antibiotic-resistant bacteria are very persistent in surface water and in the land. So the other thing is hogs, the average adult hog produces 4 times the amount of waste as a human. Human waste can't be used as a fertilizer until it's been treated and pathogens and metals removed. Swine waste, the method of treatment of swine waste is you sit it in a lagoon, more like a big open cesspool, until it's spread on the ground. And it's 75 times more toxic than untreated human waste, 200 times more toxic than treated human waste. So how big of a problem is antibiotic resistance? There are about 94,000, this is according to the CDC, 94,000 cases of MRSA a year. About 18,000 of those result in deaths. It's been estimated that it costs the economy between $9 and $26 billion a year in longer hospital stays and missed time from work. The CDC just recently put out new statistics that show there are about 946,000 hospital-acquired infections a year, resulting in about 76,000 deaths. So they didn't specify how many of those were resistant infections, but my guess is most of them were if they result in death. I always look to just about any time that you see someone, though, they died of complications from surgery, I think most of the time it's because they've picked up a resistant infection. So I want to talk a little bit, too, about the response to antibiotic-resistant issues. And there's a couple ways to look at it. There's the legislative path, and then there's a regulatory path. Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts was a leader in trying to get industrial animal operations to stop using antibiotics. Thankfully, Senator Elizabeth Warren recently picked up that battle. So trying to pull antibiotics out of food animal production is nothing new. We've been doing it, we've been trying to get it done for about 15 years. And the power of the industry has thwarted it each time. I tell people that my opinion of the industrial animal sector is that they have the money of big tobacco and the personality of the National Rifle Association. So they've got a lot of money and they play whack-a-mole pretty hard if they see any opposition rising up. And it is, I mean, across the boards, Democrat, Republican, so it takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, we've got to change what we're doing. And thankfully, Elizabeth Warren, maybe a little late, but she's joined the fight. So you see in the 111th Congress, there were 127 co-sponsors for the main legislation to pull human antibiotics out of food animal production, and there were 18 sponsors in the Senate. This Congress, those numbers have declined, and I think that's due to influence by the industry primarily. This is on the regulatory side. Looking in 1997, FDA decided they were going to pull penicillin and tetracyclines out of food animal production, the two primary medications or antibiotics used in human medicine. They issued notices saying that they were going to withdraw them. After pressure from the industry to Congress, Congress got FDA to back off, but FDA never withdrew the notices. And so they sat for about 38 years. FDA ignored two petitions by citizens in 1999 and 2005 to withdraw antibiotics. They did withdraw fluoroquinolones in 2005, so they were somewhat responsive. And they've also withdrawn cephalosporins. And I don't know, Eric Olson here, a guy I know well from the NRDC, I'm going to touch on something his organization is doing to force FDA to do their job in a minute. And the Pew Commission wanted the guidelines on antibiotic use to be mandatory. FDA likes to do things voluntarily and say, you know, please join with us, please do the right thing. And so in late 2009, 2010, they started a process on developing two guidances on antibiotic use. The first guidance was 209 that basically said we're going to do something. 213 is the guidance that's got the new antibiotic use restrictions in them. It would ask the drug companies to voluntarily change the labels or the approvals on how antibiotics are used. So instead of saying for growth promotion, now it's going to be for disease prevention. Also, the approval of appropriate use. It says that they can't be used, as I said, for growth promotion, but does not limit disease prevention use. And 213 was finalized in December of last year. There was a 90-day review by companies to say to FDA, we're going to abide by this voluntary approach. 25 of the 26 major drug companies did say they would abide by it. Now there'd be a 3-year phase-in by FDA. The problem with the voluntary approach is FDA will not perform any kind of oversight about they'll say, here's how it's to be phased in, but they're not going to collect any data to see if it's effective. And one of the main problems, the communities, the NGO community was kind of split on reacting to 213. We were very critical. We thought it was basically saying, okay, you can't use it for growth promotion, but you can use it in the same amount, the same duration, in the same way, and just call it disease prevention. And the two definitions, I don't mean to get too far down in the weeds, but the top definition is how FDA decides whether it's an appropriate prevention use. And I bolded the phrase that's really important because this is a hole you could drive a truck through in a situation where disease is likely to occur if the drug is not administered. I'll admit that if antibiotics are pulled out of CAFOs and you don't change the structural way that the CAFOs run or the way that animals are raised by giving them more access to natural surroundings, better waste management, more room, they're going to get sick and die. But that does not mean you should keep using antibiotics inappropriately. What it means is you should treat the animals better, You should find out where these operations are and permit them, and you should devote the resources to making sure that they're environmentally sound. So the Pew Commission definition was kind of based on public health concerns. Now here's where NRDC is really, I think my main hope on doing anything on antibiotic use in food animals rests with what NRDC is doing. As I said, about 38 years ago, FDA started talking about withdrawing penicillin and tetracycline. They didn't do anything. They suspended because of pressure from the industry, pressure from Congress because of the industry. They ignored petitions, and so in 2012, NRDC got a lower court ruling saying that FDA must reissue the notices and must reconsider the petitions, and FDA is appealing that to a higher court. FDA's defense was really kind of unique. It was, you know, we don't do it because it's hard. It's really hard to regulate. And the judge said, well, that's not good enough. Antibiotic use worldwide in food animal production is a problem, but unfortunately, we're the worst abuser on the planet. If you look at the countries to the left of this chart, that are mainly Scandinavian countries, they've been leaders on withdrawing antibiotic use from food animal production, the non-therapeutic antibiotic use from food animal production. And what they found was that set into motion the need to give the animals more space, treat the waste more appropriately, better nutrition, all the antimicrobial use problems initially in Denmark that I'll show you a chart on here in a little bit was compensated by four main things: giving the animals more space, cleaning the barns better, ventilating the barns better, and improving the quality of their feed. So I'm glad we're right up there with Greece. I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather us be more on this end of the scale. So we always hold Denmark up as an example of how you can withdraw antibiotics from food animal production and still produce animals humanely. This line, in Denmark, they call all non-therapeutic use growth promotion use. Whether it's for disease prevention or whatever, it's all growth promotion. You can see when they stopped it in about 1998, the production still, it declined a little bit, but it's gone up every year since. They have decreased their antibiotic reliance by about 65%, and they've doubled their production in the time that they've withdrawn antibiotics through better, more humane treatment and more sustainable management. I'd like to touch, too, a little bit on the reaction to the other Pew recommendations by the administration. And you can tell from my bio that I'm a Democrat at heart, but there's really been a failure by this administration to regulate concentrated animal feeding operations. One of the things that we said in the Pew Commission was we have to do an inventory of where these are. More of the operations have to be permitted so we know what's happening with the waste and where it's going. That was started by Lisa Jackson at the EPA, and as the general election approached in 2012, because Iowa and Minnesota were important to re-election issues, they pulled the plug on the inventory. They've released new Waters of the USA guidelines through EPA. Gina McCarthy is now the administrator. I have not gone through them completely, but there are wide exemptions for industrial animal operations. So from the environmental side, not much was done. On the enforcing the antitrust laws, the administration went around the country with a series of 6 meetings. I attended a couple of them to see if the Grain Inspection Packers and Stockyards Act was being used effectively. That's the primary mechanism to battle the trust and concentration in the meat industry. They came out with some actually pretty decent recommendations on specifically focusing on poultry production contracts because 99% of the 8.8 billion chickens raised in the country are raised under contract. And the producers have very little say on how their operations are structured and what the production protocols are. If the company says, and bird flocks are about 45 days, 47 days, they get to slaughter weight. And if a company says, you know what, we don't like what you're doing, we don't care if you've got 10 years of debt in the buildings you've built and in the heating system you've built and the watering system, if you don't make another $100,000 changes, you're not going to get a contract. There's a bit of collusion, I think, between the Farm Credit System in the United States. It's a federal lending agency that Tyson and Purdue and a lot of the other large integrators have worked with, saying, using production contracts as collateral for loans. So you got a producer that's basically not any better off than indentured servants were in the Middle Ages. So they promulgated some good rules on changing this system, on enforcing the law. There was pushback from the industry, as there always is. As a matter of fact, when Paul said he thought I maybe had a bodyguard because of the press I get, I was worried that he saw an industry guy follow me in. So they dropped all the improvements in production contracts, and we're probably farther away now from meaningful antitrust legislation against the companies, or antitrust lawsuits against the companies than we were before Obama became president. Paul's group worked very hard to, in a state, I call it an outside-in strategy, to get states to ban certain types of production systems. Every place they fought the egg producers, they won. And the egg producers finally said, you know what? God, instead of spending $5 million a state to get our ass kicked, maybe we ought to come to the table. They developed an egg cage standard size, so it wouldn't be state by state, endorsed by the Humane Society, endorsed by the United Egg Producers, introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein, and at every turn, the pig industry, the cattle industry turned on the United Egg Producers, and every time it was brought up in context of the Farm Bill was just passed, it was beaten down by the industry, and the administration didn't do anything to support it. So, I mean, I think change is possible. I work in the Baltimore, Washington area, and I get really kind of depressed when I stay there too long. I'm very hopeful when I come to a place like this and see people, activists on the ground that want to make a change. The chairman of the commission, as I said, was a former governor of Kansas, and his main belief was that politicians see the light when they begin to feel the heat. And you guys are the ones that can apply the heat. You've got it pretty easy, I have to say, in Massachusetts. But you've got families in other parts of the country. And what is happening in these operations is a serious threat to public health. And we are rapidly approaching the post-antibiotic era in medicine. Last October, I was in Texas speaking to a group, and I think I either got some bad recirculated air in the airplane or I was too close to a hog operation. I got an antibiotic-resistant strain of pneumococcal bacteria. 2 rounds of antibiotics didn't help. And they had to end up putting me on like the last antibiotic that works. So from a personal experience, I can say it's not anything to delay. And it'll be things like, if read information about the medicine in the 1920s. You have a tooth pulled and you die because you get an infection in your jaw, or you get a scratch that's infected with MRSA and it goes sepsis on you, it gets in your blood, and there's nothing that can save your life. So again, I want to thank Aaron and the Society for having me today, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
I got a little confused when you were talking about the production contracts. Did you say that they did make some improvements?
Yeah, they did. Well, the original proposal was actually pretty significant improvements, but those all fell by the wayside because of pressure by the industry. And Republican members of the House have actually tried to put riders in agriculture appropriations bills to even gut the very modest gains that were actually made in the Bush years. But all the stuff that came out of the field hearings that were very positive for producers have not been put into effect. So there's still, I'm on the board of a group called the Socially Responsible Ag Project, or SRAP. They recently helped a producer in Arkansas, a broiler producer in Arkansas, who faced this very situation, had $500,000 in debt because of the system he built based on industry standards. When he refused, they were like 2 years from getting out under debt, and he was going to quit producing chickens because it was, as he said to the members of SRAP, it was eroding his soul to treat animals that way. The company, Tyson, came back and said, you know what, you need to make $150,000 worth of changes in your operation. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. He lost his contract. Within 3 days, the Farm Credit System started foreclosing on him. And so SRAP, it's a team of on-the-ground activists and attorneys came in and actually helped save his operation. But that's one of hundreds and hundreds of producers that face the same thing. The industry also has been, in some parts of the country, like Arkansas, they kind of prey on immigrant populations. There's a group from Southeast Asia called the Hmong, and they attract them into these production system schemes, saying, you know, you'll be wealthy in 10 years, and they really take advantage of them. So, yeah, it's what little progress was first put out was really beaten down by the industry. Yeah.
So you had a lot of public health. Can you push your mic, please? Okay, sorry. I noticed you had quite a few members from the public health community on the Pew Commission. I'm curious how receptive medical societies have been, or have there been any like big allies from the medical community to support the work?
Yeah, there've been some. The public health community and the medical community are a little bit different. I don't think there's any medical school in the country that teaches nutrition, for example, as a way to good health. And that's one of the cores of the public health community. But when the Pew Commission ended, I went to the Pew Environment Group to help advise campaigns to implement these recommendations. And their Human Health and Industrial Farming campaign has been very successful in getting the Infectious Disease Society of America and the American Academy of Pediatrics interested in this issue. The Center for a Livable Future and most public health advocates were on the opposite side from Pew of what FDA actually did. So that's when I referenced the split in the NGO community. We were public health people on one side, and really the medical community was kind of on the other side. Their attitude, I think, laudably, their attitude is, hey, just talking about it's progress. My worry is, you know, in this guidance, the companies had 90 days to say whether they were going to comply. 25 of the 26 major drug companies said they would. 3-year phase in. And I don't mean to sound cynical, but been around government long enough to know that, okay, 3-year phase in, they're going to want at least 5 or 6 years worth of data collection, right? Even though FDA hasn't figured out how to collect the data yet. So we're probably looking at 12 to 15 years before, this is revisited. And I think that, we're governed by elections. I don't know if you guys pay attention to Nate Silver, the guy that yeah, he's 65% chance the Republicans will take over the Senate this year. And then I just think, Obama's going to be left out there on a limb. And that's my opinion, not CLF's opinion. So I think that that's why there's a lot of interest in working at the state level. CLF is working with NRDC in California to try to curtail the antibiotic use in food animal production in California. New York has been interested in curtailing antibiotic use in food animals. And I think what we have to start doing is talking about the economic benefit by changing the whole system. The Union of Concerned Scientists, this is a little bit off of just animal production, but the Union of Concerned Scientists recently put out a report called the $11 trillion reward. And that the theory of it, or the thesis of it, was if we aligned our dietary guidelines and crop subsidies, what would that mean? So it'd be more production of fruits and vegetables, be more sustainable production. You'd reduce chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes and some stroke and some cancers. And the combination of economic activity that would generate in agriculture and the decrease in healthcare costs equal $11 trillion. So I think if we can start talking about things in that way, I'm trying to be optimistic, it may help. So, yes, back there.
No, the FDA, I've never heard anything good about them. I'm wondering if you anything about any target they are, do they respond to any approach in terms of doing right thing? I mean, it's a huge thing, but any light you can shed on their workings, and is there any way to shift it?
That's a good question. I mean, when the Obama administration came into power in 2009, I was actually pretty optimistic. At her confirmation hearing in the Senate, the FDA administrator designate Margaret Hamburg said we should be looking at antibiotic resistance as an issue as if our hair were on fire. And yet the approach they've taken is a voluntary one. They regulate at the consent of the regulated. And the FDA came out of the brain of Theodore Roosevelt when he was president. And people always think of him as a trust buster because of the big banks. Well, he hated the meat companies more than the big banks because he was a rancher in western North Dakota and was basically driven out of business by the meat companies because of the high rates of shipping cattle from western North Dakota to Chicago to slaughter. I think he'd be spinning in his grave if he saw the way FDA operates. So I think that, again, this is not a public health rule or a public health approach, but I think that until someone up for elective politics is either beaten because of these issues or is elected because they support a more sustainable approach to agriculture and food animal production, it's going to be hard to get any traction. I think that's why maybe work at the state level is where we're going to focus more of our attention. You have to watch the federal level just.
Are they responsive to government at all?
Not that I've seen. The guy I quoted up there, Dr. Josh Sharfstein, had been the top health officer for the city of Baltimore, and people at CLF had a very good relationship with him. He was supposed to become FDA administrator in the second Obama term. He left. He now runs the Department of Health in Maryland. He left telling people that it was just so hard to make the FDA work. The new deputy administrator is a guy named Mike Taylor, who has long ties to the food animal industry. He has done some good things on food safety issues, but if you ever seen Food Inc., the movie Food Inc., he was Monsanto Mike. After the Clinton administration left, he went to Monsanto as a general counsel for years. So he calls anybody that criticizes this voluntary approach, how does he put it, skeptics. So I don't know what will affect change except building it from the bottom up like you guys are going to start doing tomorrow. Yeah, Paul.
You mentioned, I noticed you mentioned who's on the board, and Bernard Rowland, the really premier veterinary ethicist, who's on it. What's the response been of the veterinary establishment, the American Veterinary Medical Association, the veterinary schools? Has it been positive, or has it been to just obscure you by ignoring you?
Well, they, when the first Pew report was put out in 2008, I think the industry thought, oh, this is going to go on the shelf. No one will pay attention to this. About 6 weeks later, the AVMA put out a 40-page rebuttal of everything we said. The AVMA is an interesting group because they have actually part of their Hippocratic oath for animal medicine is a concern about human health. About 80% of the vets in the country are companion animal vets. The other 20% are large animal vets. Most of those reside in the large companies. Feed companies and integrators. The leadership of the AVMA is almost all large animal vets. So the response has not been very good. And any effort, Michael Blackwell, who was on the commission, was a lifetime member of the AVMA, was a large animal vet, ran a vet school. He basically got drummed out of the AVMA because he tried to work internally to change their policies to adhere more to the Pew Commission. So they've been a disappointment. The funny thing is, if you talk to a companion animal vet, they're finding the same treatment problems that doctors are, that resistant infections are rife in companion animals. Fewer and fewer antibiotics are effective. And when you tell them, I mean, I've got a great dog I rescued, and when I talked to my vet about, you know how much antibiotics are used in food animal production, they don't have a clue. My doctor didn't either. When I told my physician, I won't say everything he said, but he goes, "What the F?" And I said, "Yeah." So I think there's just not a lack of awareness, and also most of the sponsorship of AVMA meetings are the drug companies. So. Oh, yeah. Oh, one last one.
Thanks so much for coming. I noticed a lot of what you said was definitely from the top down, and you touched briefly on the fact of bottom up being effective. And I know when I saw Marion Nestle, I don't know how to say
Nessel.
it, but Nessel, she said that the only way that things are going to change is if it comes from the bottom, like grassroots. So I was wondering, what influence have you seen from that, from the top, and like how can the bottom be more influential and effective?
Well, I think it's what you guys are going to start doing tomorrow. I think going door to door. It's got to be run, again, this is my opinion and not CLF's opinion, it's got to be run like a political campaign. I think that you've got to build the support from the bottom up through grassroots work, like you do any successful political campaign. One of the things I think is missing, we've got lots of great documentaries on the food system and food animals. What I would like to see is somebody, and Chipotle does a lot of great kind of, nice cartoons and stuff that are, I would like to see someone do some really hard political ads on this, or maybe not political ads, public information ads. Because when people make the connection between the animal welfare and the human health impact, it drives them crazy. I think that's maybe part of what's missing, but I think you've got to build the base first. And again, like I said, that's why I think CLF is going to be more interested in working in states. So it's like I said, whenever I go out around the country and speak, I feel so much better about things than just watching the money flow in Washington. And at one of my last speeches, someone said, "What's the single most important thing that can be done to change the food system?" And I said, "Campaign finance reform." So, thank you.